Many people stretch their hamstrings all the time seeking relief from tightness back there. But what's interesting is a lot of the times what I've noticed is people who complain about their hamstrings being tight the most also stretch them the most. And I don't think that that's necessarily a coincidence. A big misconception in the fitness and rehab industry is that muscles feel tight because they are short or overactive. They're in a shortened concentric position. And that's not necessarily true because every muscle should have a degree of resting slack within it. Now, let's take this band right here as the hamstrings. Now, the hamstrings do attach on the backside of the pelvis on the ischial tuberosity here. And the hamstring needs to have slack just like every muscle does. So that way it can contract and pull the pelvis back, or it can elongate as the pelvis goes into more of an anterior tilt. Now, if I have a pelvis that's in a lot of anterior pelvic tilt and that pelvis is being pushed forward in space, because the hamstring attaches down below around the knee, you're going to see that hamstring get stretched out more and more and more the more forward this pelvis goes into anterior tilt. So this is a tight muscle that has a lot of pressure on it because it's being pulled from its attachment sites, both attachment sites. So this hamstring isn't tight because it's too short and overactive. It's actually in a lengthened state, which is why that person feels tightness. So stretching it out more might provide them some temporary relief, but that doesn't mean that that's going to stick because they're just being pushed forward. They're stretching themselves into where they're already comfortable, which is that elongated hamstring position. But then it's just going to feel tight later on within a couple of minutes to a couple of hours because they're not actually solving the root of their issue, which is a hamstring that is elongated. Most of the time, they're going to present in some degree of anterior pelvic tilt. The other thing is that they're either going to have a huge straight leg raise or they're going to have a very small limited straight leg raise. So when I put them down on a table and I measure their straight leg raise, oftentimes what happens is with people with very long hamstrings, they're going to just fling their leg back and they're going to get beyond or around 90 degrees very easily, because that hamstring is in this elongated position. However, if I have someone that's very, very extended and they have a good bit of anterior pelvic tilt, their hamstrings are so elongated that when they go and they do a straight leg raise, they can't get more than 45 degrees off of the ground because that hamstring is so tight and elongated that the tension in that muscle is not allowing them to stretch it out any further because it's basically on a max stretch position. Now, the solution would be to reposition the pelvis out of an anterior orientation for these people. Get them to a position where that muscle has more slack. It's not being pulled from both ends. If I get that pelvis into a better position, now there's more slack for this muscle to shorten and elongate as necessary, depending on the task. So really, what we want to do is turn the hamstrings on. And we want to do that in a position that's easy to facilitate those hamstrings turning on. There's two different positions we can do this in. So what I would encourage you to do is if you have one of those huge straight leg raises beyond 90 degrees, or you have a 45 degree or less straight leg raise, give these exercises a try and then retest what happens with your straight leg raise. If it's really big, then you're probably going to see it get worse, which is a good sign because the hamstring now has more tension in it, which we need if our pelvis is in a better position. More flexibility and range of motion is not always better. And for those who have a very limited straight leg raise, try these exercises and then retest your straight leg raise and see how it probably is going to feel a little bit better. Getting the pelvis in a more neutral position is a fundamental component of my programs, like my beginner body restoration program, because if I can get my pelvis in a more neutral position and be able to own this, now it has room to be able to go into extension and anterior tilt or flexion and posterior tilt as it needs to. Neutral is just a starting point. It's not an end destination. So we want to be able to access this position so that way we can move into other positions more effectively. I would recommend you try these exercises for about 2 sets of 5 very slow breaths. Breathing is key here, because in addition to the hamstrings pulling the pelvis back, as we exhale, the obliques, which attach up here, are going to contract to help pull the pelvis underneath us more as well. So when we're done with those exercises, we can stand up and we should feel like our hips are underneath us a little bit more, and that would be a very positive sign. I'd recommend doing those 2 sets of 5 breaths at least once per day, if not twice per day, and that would lead to, ideally, results that stick over time. This is the 90-90 hip lift with ball hold from Postural Restoration Institute. To set up for this, we need to be, as the name suggests, in a 90-degree bend at both our knees and our hips. Now, we have a little shelf set up here because it's going to be most helpful for most people to have something to dig down with. And we need to do this still with the feet on the wall. If the feet are off of the wall, that is not good. So the whole foot needs to be flat here. And we have a ball in between the knees that allows the knees to stay in line with the toes. So it shouldn't be too small where the knees are collapsing in or too much where the knees are too wide. It needs to stay in line with the toes. So we're going to initiate this by dragging down on the wall with the heels, but keeping the whole foot flat. Now that shelf is there to allow you to do that more easily without the feet moving. If there's no shelf, the feet should still not move. But the tailbone is going to come off of the floor as a result of that, and the hamstrings should engage on both sides. Now, a good cue I like to use is imagine that you're a piece of Velcro being pulled off of the ground one vertebrae at a time. That should allow you to keep that tuck of the hips and keep the low back flat still. So now all he's gonna do is keep his hands on his low ribs, get a full exhale through the mouth as if he's sighing, and that's going to engage his side abs. After he exhales for about 5 to 10 seconds, he needs to hold that very slightly as he closes his mouth, inhale through the nose, and he's going to feel his chest expand, and that's great. He's gonna do that for about 5 breaths. The most common mistake on this exercise is people are gonna pull the toes back excessively, and we don't want that to happen. We want the whole foot flat. The other thing is people are going to lose their heels and try to pull down with the toes instead. So just make sure that you're concentrating on creating awareness between the heels and the hamstrings here. The other thing is people are going to get their hips too high off of the ground. So this isn't a bridge, this is a hip lift. So make sure that the pelvis is off of the ground, but the low back is still on the ground mostly. You may get a little bit higher depending on the person, but for the most part, you're gonna keep the low back flat. This is the hook line hamstring bridge with a ball hold. The setup for this, we're in this A-frame position with our feet flat on the ground, the whole foot flat on both sides. And we have a ball that allows our knees to stay in line with our toes and our hips. It's not too wide, shoving our knees out, not too narrow, getting our knees to cave in. It should be keeping it in line with both the hips and the knees. And then what we're gonna do is just place our hands on our low ribs, and maintaining the whole foot flat, we're gonna focus on keeping the weight in the heels. So we don't want the toes to come up as a result of that. Keep the whole foot flat. But think about trying to drag your heels towards your butt. They won't move, but the intention will get your pelvis to slightly lift off of the floor. So your low back stays flat, but your tailbone is slightly off of the floor, and you should feel your hamstrings on both sides engage. And you're gonna hold that position as you breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, get all the air out until you feel a little bit of side ab engagement, and then pause, close your mouth, tongue on the roof of your mouth, inhale through the nose, and you're gonna feel your rib cage expand, keeping a little bit of that side ab tension when you inhale. If you're having a hard time finding your hamstrings, what you can do is place a couple of dumbbells in between your heels and your hips, and that'll allow you to drag back into some external object so you can find those hamstrings a little bit better.